The colony world was covered in endless snow. The wind screamed across the empty streets, carrying with it the bite of freezing air. On the edge of the small human settlement, a man named Daniel walked alone, his coat thin, his boots worn. He was not rich. In fact, most days he struggled just to keep himself fed. But on that night, destiny waited for him in the shadows. As he crossed the old mining road, Daniel noticed a faint movement near the abandoned supply crates. At first he thought it was just trash blown by the wind, but then he heard a soft sound like a whimper, weak and broken. Curious, he stepped closer, and what he saw stopped his breath. Two small alien girls huddled together in the snow. Their skin was pale, their clothes torn, and their faces thin with hunger. They looked like children who had not eaten for days. One of them tried to cover the other with her tiny arms, protecting her from the cold. The other girl's lips trembled as she whispered something in a language Daniel did not understand. For a moment, Daniel froze. He had his own problems. He barely had enough food for himself. Helping them would mean sharing the little he had, and in the galaxy, most people turned their heads away from such sights. But as Daniel looked at the frightened eyes of the two orphans, he felt his heart tighten. Without another thought, he removed his coat and wrapped it around them. The girls flinched at first, scared of the human, but soon they realized his hands were gentle, not cruel. Daniel knelt beside them and spoke softly. "It's okay. You're safe now." They did not understand the words, but the warmth in his voice made them trust. He carried them back to his small home at the edge of the settlement. Inside, the place was simple. Just a wooden table, an old heater, and a single bed. He set them down near the heater, watching as their shaking slowed. Then, he opened the last of his food, a small pot of stew he had planned to eat alone. It wasn't much, only a little meat and vegetables, but he placed bowls in front of the girls. At first, they hesitated. In their world, kindness was rare. They expected cruelty, maybe even a trap. But the smell of warm food was too much for their empty stomachs. Slowly, carefully, they began to eat. Tears ran down their faces as they swallowed the hot meal. For the first time in many days, their bodies felt warmth and their hearts felt hope. Daniel sat quietly, watching them eat. A strange feeling filled his chest. He had given up his dinner, but he did not feel poorer. Instead, he felt richer than ever before. The sight of those two children surviving because of him gave him a kind of peace he had not known in years. The night passed slowly. The storm outside raged, but inside, the small house was calm. The girls fell asleep on the bed, curled together under Daniel's old blanket. He sat in the chair, staring at the firelight, wondering what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know their names, their past, or their future. He only knew one thing: he could not walk away from them. And so, on that cold night, a simple act of kindness was born. Daniel did not know that this choice would echo across the galaxy. He did not know that the two starving orphans would carry this moment deep in their hearts. All he knew was that he could not let them die. It was just one meal, one warm coat, and one night of safety. But sometimes, the smallest kindness can change everything. The storm faded by morning, leaving behind a white blanket of snow that covered the colony like a silent graveyard. Daniel woke early, as he always did, his body used to years of hard work. But this morning was different. Instead of silence, he heard soft breathing. The two orphan girls still slept in his bed, their thin faces finally calm. Daniel moved quietly, careful not to wake them. He stepped outside into the cold air, carrying a small shovel. Life on the edge of the settlement was never easy. Every day he worked in the old mining fields or carried supplies for traders, earning just enough credits to survive. His hands were rough, his back tired, but he never complained. As he shoveled the snow away from his door, neighbors passed by. Some noticed the strange coat inside and the faint shadows of children through his window. They frowned. In this settlement, nobody wasted food or kindness on strangers. Survival came first, and charity was seen as weakness. One man even stopped and called out, "Daniel, don't tell me you're sheltering outsiders. They'll bring trouble. Better to leave them where you found them." Daniel didn't answer. He simply lowered his head and continued working. He knew how the colony thought. To them, the orphan girls were just a burden, mouths to feed, problems to carry. But Daniel's heart told him otherwise. When he returned inside, the girls were awake. They sat silently on the edge of the bed, watching him with wide, unsure eyes. The older one tried to speak, her voice cracked and weak, but the words were in her alien tongue. Daniel only smiled, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're safe here," he said softly, even though he knew they didn't understand. He gave them a little bread, breaking his supply for the week. They ate slowly, shy but grateful. The younger one, smaller and frailer, looked at Daniel with a gaze that was both fearful and hopeful at the same time. He could see it. These children had lost everything. Parents, home, maybe even their entire world. Days passed, and the routine of Daniel's life changed. He would leave for work in the morning, and the girls would stay in his small home, waiting for him to return. At first, they stayed quiet, afraid to touch anything. But slowly, as trust grew, they began to move around, helping in little ways, folding his blanket, placing wood by the fire, even trying to sweep the floor. Daniel never asked them for thanks. He never asked for repayment. He simply gave what little he had, because he knew what it meant to be alone. His own childhood had been harsh, his parents taken by disease, his youth spent working in mines instead of schools. Perhaps that was why he understood their silence so well. Yet, deep in his mind, a question lingered. Who were they? Why were they alone in the snow? Their eyes carried a story, one too heavy for children. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he heard them cry softly in their sleep, whispering names he did not know. The settlement did not approve. People gossiped. Some warned him that feeding orphans would drain him. Others whispered that strangers only brought danger. But Daniel ignored them. He had made his choice the night he found them in the snow. 10 years from that day, he would still remember the firelight, the way their small hands held onto his coat, and the look in their eyes as they ate their first warm meal in days. What he did not know was that they too remembered. Every act of kindness, every moment of safety, was burned into their hearts like a promise. For Daniel, life remained simple. For the girls, it was the beginning of something greater. Years slipped by like sand through open fingers. The colony remained quiet, its people working hard, living day by day, never dreaming of changing the galaxy. For Daniel, life was the same. Long hours in the mine, small meals, and evenings spent in his little home. But there was one difference. The 2 orphan girls he had once rescued no longer looked weak and starving. They were growing. The older girl, whom Daniel had started calling Lyra, learned quickly. Though she spoke little at first, her mind was sharp. She picked up the human language by listening to Daniel and imitating his words. Within a year, she could speak broken sentences. The younger one, Sarah, was slower to learn, but had a curious nature. She would point at objects, waiting for Daniel to name them, repeating the sounds until she got them right. At night, Daniel sometimes heard them whisper in their own tongue. Their voices carried sadness, but also determination. They were remembering something he did not understand, a past they rarely shared. Daniel did not push them. He knew every soul carried wounds that could not be forced open. Unknown to Daniel, beyond the snowy colony, their names were still remembered. Lyra and Sarah were not just orphans. They were the last living daughters of a fallen house, an alien royal family destroyed in a war no one on Daniel's colony ever cared about. Their people, scattered and enslaved, spoke of them in hushed tones, praying the lost children would survive. Stories began to spread. Traders carried rumors across the stars. 2 alien girls had been seen alive, protected by a human miner on a forgotten world. The details changed with every telling. Some said the human was a soldier, others claimed he was a wanderer with a secret past, but the heart of the story was always the same. When the galaxy turned its back, one human offered them warmth. These whispers reek. He'd places Daniel would never imagine. In secret camps, refugees told the tale as if it were legend. To them, the nameless human became a symbol of hope, proof that kindness could still exist in a cruel universe. Meanwhile, in the colony, life was not kind. Supplies grew shorter, the mines grew more dangerous, and sickness spread in the winter months. Many families left, searching for better lives elsewhere. Daniel stayed, not because he loved the colony, but because the 2 girls had no one else. He refused to abandon them. By the time 10 years had passed, Lyra and Sarah were no longer helpless children. Lyra carried herself with quiet strength, her voice calm but commanding. Sarah, though softer, had a fire in her eyes that reminded Daniel of storms. Together, they began to dream of something beyond the colony. Sometimes Lyra would ask Daniel questions. Why do humans work in mines? Why do you not fight for more? Daniel would smile sadly and shake his head. Because some battles, child, are too big for us. We just live as we can. But Lyra's gaze would sharpen. Not forever. They had not forgotten who they were. They had not forgotten the night in the snow. And most of all, they had not forgotten the man who gave them life when the galaxy abandoned them. The whispers in the stars grew louder. Hidden allies searched for them. Enemies too began to listen. Somewhere out there, powerful eyes turned toward the frozen colony world, waiting for the day when truth would surface. Daniel had no idea. To him, they were only two girls he had fed once long ago. He did not know that his single act of kindness was turning into a story that would shake entire empires. And far above the colony, in distant skies, destiny was already moving closer. The years that followed were not gentle. Life in the colony grew harder with each season, and Daniel felt the weight of it in his bones. He was older now, his hair touched with gray, his hands more calloused than ever. Yet beside him, the two girls, Lyra and Sarah, were no longer fragile orphans. They were young women, and they carried the strength of survival within them. Still, the world around them never accepted them fully. To the colony, they were outsiders. Children of a different race with strange eyes and unfamiliar features, always whispered about in the markets. When Daniel walked with them, people sometimes looked away. Other times they stared too long, with cold expressions that cut deeper than words. Daniel noticed it, but he did not speak of it. Instead, he tried to shield them from the cruelty of others. He gave them what he could, an education in the little things, how to count credits, how to barter with traders, how to read old human books he had saved. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. One night, Lyra asked him directly, "Why do they hate us? We have done nothing." Her voice trembled, though her eyes burned with anger. Daniel sighed. Because people fear what they do not understand. And sometimes, fear turns into hate. Sarah, quieter but more thoughtful, leaned against him. Then we must grow stronger, so strong that they cannot ignore us. Those words marked the beginning of their struggle. The girls worked harder than any of the colony children. They studied languages from passing merchants. They practiced repairing old machines in Daniel's shed, learning how wires, gears, and engines worked. Lyra showed a natural gift for leadership, able to persuade others with calm reasoning. Sarah had sharper instincts. She could see when someone was lying or hiding something. Together, they were learning skills beyond their years. But hardship tested them daily. There were weeks when food was scarce, and Daniel had to choose between feeding himself or the girls. He always chose them, even if it meant going to bed hungry. Sarah once caught him pretending to eat while secretly pushing his share into her bowl. Tears filled her eyes, but she said nothing. She only ate slowly, trying to leave a little for him. Their bond with Daniel grew unbreakable, but the outside world remained cruel. Once a group of older boys cornered Lyra in the market, mocking her alien features. Daniel arrived just in time to pull them away, but the damage was done. That night, Lyra sat by the fire with her fists clenched. "One day," she whispered, "I will show them who we are. They will not laugh then." Daniel feared for them. He knew the galaxy was vast, filled with dangers beyond cruel words. Yet he also saw the fire inside them and wondered if it was destiny shaping them for something greater. As the years passed, the girls began to hear the whispers of their heritage. Traders, unaware of who they truly were, sometimes spoke of the lost daughters of a fallen house. Whenever the names came up, the sisters grew silent, listening carefully, piecing together fragments of their forgotten past. The truth was like a seed, buried deep, pushing slowly toward light. They were not just orphans. They were survivors of a legacy others wanted erased. And with that truth came struggle to survive each day in a world that did not want them. Struggle to find their place when they had no people, no home. Struggle to rise above fear and become more than what fate had left them. Daniel saw it all. He could not stop their pain, but he could stand beside them, giving them one thing no one else would: love without condition. And in the silent nights, as stars glittered above the snowy colony, Lyra and Sarah silently vowed they would not remain forgotten. Time moved forward like an endless march, and with every passing year, Lyra and Sarah grew stronger. The fragile girls Daniel had found in the snow were gone. In their place stood two young women, shaped by hardship, sharpened by pain, and bound by a silent promise to never be powerless again. The colony still whispered about them, still saw them as outsiders, but the sisters no longer bowed their heads in shame. Lyra, tall and calm, carried herself with quiet dignity. Sarah, quick and fiery, moved with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Together, they carried an invisible weight, something even Daniel could feel when he looked at them. One evening, a group of traders arrived at the colony, bringing with them crates of tools and rare supplies. Daniel, as usual, worked unloading them for a few credits. Lyra and Sarah stood nearby, curious. Among the traders, a scarred alien soldier noticed the sisters. His eyes widened. He whispered to another merchant, then quickly turned away. Later that night, Sarah asked Daniel, "Why did that man look at us like he knew us?" Daniel frowned but had no answer. He could only feel unease in his chest. The sisters, however, felt something else, a stirring of recognition, like the past was reaching for them. The next weeks changed everything. The sisters began speaking more boldly. Lyra started teaching younger children in the colony simple words and numbers, even though some parents resisted. Sarah began fixing broken farming equipment, earning respect from the few who dared to trust her. Slowly, the settlement that once mocked them began to rely on their skills. Daniel watched with quiet pride, though a part of him feared. "You are making yourselves seen," he warned them one night as they sat by the fire. "The galaxy is not kind to those who rise too high." Lyra's eyes glowed with determination. "Then let it be unkind. We have hidden long. Enough." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We were not born to remain forgotten." That night, Daniel realized something he had long ignored. These girls were no longer children. They were becoming leaders, even if the colony refused to see it. But the galaxy had already begun to notice. In secret corners of space, whispers spread louder. Tales of the lost daughters had reached rebel camps and broken fleets. Refugees spoke of hope. Some said the sisters were already training to reclaim what was stolen from them. Others claimed they had seen visions of a future where the sisters stood at the head of armies. Of course, not all who listened were friends. Enemies of their fallen house still existed, those who had destroyed their family. To them, the news of survival was dangerous. If the sisters lived, then revenge was possible, and so, eyes filled with hatred turned toward the frozen colony world. One winter night, Daniel awoke to the sound of voices outside. Two cloaked strangers had come, asking questions about the sisters. They claimed to be harmless travelers, but Daniel knew better. He barred his door and kept the girls hidden. For the first time in years, he felt the sharp edge of fear. He realized then that their rise could not be stopped. Whether the world wanted it or not, the sisters were walking toward their destiny. They were no longer orphans lost in the snow. They were heirs of something greater, something that would either save their people or destroy them. As the strangers left, Daniel looked at the sisters. "You must be careful," he whispered. "Your path will not be easy." Lyra placed her hand on his. "You gave us life when we had nothing. Whatever comes, we will never forget that." Sarah's eyes burned like fire. "And when the time comes, the galaxy will know who we are." The rise of the forgotten had begun. Daniel's life had always been simple, and as the years pressed on, it only became smaller. His back bent from long days in the mines, his hair turned gray, and his hands shook when he lifted heavy tools. He was not old by galactic standards, but hardship had carved deep lines into his face. The colony rarely noticed him anymore. To most, Daniel was just another worker, one of many men who lived and died unseen. He rose each morning, walked to the mines, returned tired, and sat quietly by the fire. Day after day, the same pattern repeated. Yet for Lyra and Sarah, the world was changing. The sisters now stood tall, no longer the starving children Daniel had once carried in his arms. Lyra spoke with calm strength, often gathering small groups of colonists to teach them, guide them, even solve disputes. People who once turned away now began to listen. Sarah, with her sharp eyes and quick mind, had become the colony's best mechanic. Traders sought her help when their ships needed repairs, paying her with food and credits. To Daniel, it was strange. The girls who had once depended on him for everything were now becoming pillars of the colony. He was proud but also uneasy. He could feel them pulling away, not with coldness but with destiny. They were stepping into a world larger than he had ever known. At times he wondered if they still remembered the night he found them in the snow. Did they remember the pot of stew, the coat wrapped around their shoulders, the fire that warmed them? He never asked. Perhaps he was afraid of the answer. One evening, Daniel sat alone outside his small house, staring at the stars. The night was clear, the sky full of glittering lights. He thought of the worlds he would never see, the adventures he would never have. His life had been spent here, in one forgotten corner of the galaxy, and it would likely end here too. Behind him, the door opened softly. Lyra stepped out, followed by Sarah. They stood beside him, silent for a long while, gazing at the same stars. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Do you ever wonder what waits out there?" Daniel gave a tired smile. "No, the stars are for others, not for men like me." But Lyra's voice was steady. "You are wrong. You gave us hope when no one else did. Without you, those stars would mean nothing to us." Daniel shook his head, embarrassed by her words. "I only gave you food, that's all." The sisters exchanged a look, one Daniel did not understand. To him, it had been one night of kindness. To them, it had been the beginning of everything. In the colony, whispers continued. Rumors of the sisters' true origin spread quietly. Some said they were children of nobles. Others claimed they were blessed by the stars. Daniel ignored the talk, but he noticed strangers visiting the settlement more often, travelers who seemed to watch the girls closely. Life pressed on, but Daniel's role faded. Where once he had been their protector, now he was the man in the background. The sisters worked, spoke, and grew beyond him. He loved them like his own daughters, but deep down he felt the distance growing. At night, when they were gone, he would sit by the fire and wonder if they even needed him anymore. He did not know that in their hearts they still carried him as their savior. He did not know that one day they would return for him. For now, Daniel lived quietly, forgotten by the colony, unaware that destiny was already moving toward his door. It was an ordinary evening in the colony. Daniel sat on his wooden chair outside his small home, staring at the snow-covered ground. The air was cold, but he was used to it. His life had long become a rhythm of work, rest, and silence. He thought the world had forgotten him, and he had learned to accept it. The settlement was quiet. Families gathered inside their homes, heaters glowing faintly, children playing softly. The night sky above was wide and endless, stars scattered across the black canvas. Daniel had seen it 1,000 times before, but tonight, something was different. At first, it was only a faint glimmer, a star that seemed to shine brighter than the rest. He narrowed his eyes, watching. Slowly, the light grew larger. It was not a star at all. It was moving. Other colonists noticed too. Doors opened, voices rose, and people stepped into the snow, pointing at the sky. The light became brighter, larger, until its glow washed over the entire colony. Fear spread quickly. Was it a pirate ship, a war vessel? Had someone come to claim the settlement? Daniel stood, his heart pounding. The light descended lower, breaking through clouds, revealing a shape unlike any ship he had ever seen. It was massive, sleek, and shining with silver and gold. Not the rough, battered ships of traders or soldiers. This was something greater. A vessel of power, of wealth, a starship fit for kings. The ground trembled as it lowered itself above the colony. Wind roared, snow whipped into the air. Children cried, and parents pulled them close. The colonists had never seen such a ship before. Their small world had no importance in the galaxy, yet here was a luxury starship descending upon them. Daniel's mind raced. Why here? Why now? He was no leader, no soldier, no one of value. Ships like this belonged to empires, to rulers, to people whose names echoed across star systems. He was just a miner. The ship slowed, its great engines humming like thunder. A platform extended from its side, lowering toward the ground. The colonists held their breath, waiting, afraid. Daniel's eyes fixed on the platform as it touched the snowy earth with a heavy thud. From the blinding light of the ship, two figures stepped forward, tall, elegant, wrapped in robes of deep blue and silver, their faces hidden by the glow, their steps steady and purposeful. The crowd fell into silence, fear and awe mixing together. As the figures approached, Daniel felt something strange in his chest. A memory stirred, two small shapes in the snow, trembling and weak. His heart raced. Could it be? The figures drew closer, and at last, the light revealed their faces. Two women, no longer children, but radiant with strength and dignity. Their eyes burned with determination, their presence commanding respect from everyone around. Daniel's breath caught. His mind struggled to believe it, but his heart already knew. Lyra and Sarah. The orphans he had once found in the snow, the children he had fed with his last meal, stood before him now as women of power. They looked at him, and in their eyes was something no one else could see: gratitude, love, and a promise fulfilled. The colonists gasped as the two women stopped before Daniel, and then, to the shock of all, they bowed. Not to a leader, not to a king, but to a forgotten miner. Daniel stood frozen, the world spinning around him. The luxury starship glowed behind them, the entire colony watching in stunned silence. The man who thought he was forgotten was about to learn he had never been forgotten at all. The colony stood frozen in silence. The great starship loomed above them, its golden hull shining in the night sky, while the two women stood before Daniel. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. The only sound was the low hum of the ship's engines and the crunch of snow under their feet. Lyra and Sarah lifted their heads, their eyes locked on the old miner. Time seemed to collapse. 10 long years falling away to that single night when a man with nothing had given them everything. Daniel could barely breathe. His lips trembled, his hands shook. He stared at them as though seeing ghosts. It can't be, he whispered. But it was. Lyra stepped forward first, her voice steady and graceful, carried across the gathering crowd. Do you remember, Daniel? The night you found us in the snow? The night you gave 2 starving children food, warmth, and hope? Gasps echoed through the crowd. Colonists glanced at one another in disbelief. The strangers from the shining ship were not strangers at all. They were the orphans who had once been saved by a forgotten miner. Daniel's throat tightened. His voice came out rough, almost broken. You were just children. I only gave you a meal, nothing more. Sarah smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened. To us, it was not just a meal. It was life. It was the first time we knew kindness. That moment gave us the strength to survive, and every step we have taken since began with you. The colonists shifted uncomfortably. Many of them remembered the way they had looked down on the 2 girls, the way they had whispered behind Daniel's back when he chose to shelter them. Now those same girls stood in robes of nobility, backed by a starship greater than anything they had ever seen. Lyra turned to the crowd, her voice ringing with quiet authority. When the galaxy abandoned us, this man gave us hope. When no one else cared if we lived or died, he shared his home, his food, and his warmth. To him, it was a small act. To us, it was everything. Then she turned back to Daniel. She and Sarah dropped to their knees in the snow. The sight stunned the colony. 2 powerful women, leaders of a ship fit for rulers, knelt before a worn-out miner. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He had never expected gratitude. He had never thought of himself as a savior. All those years he had lived believing his life was small and meaningless. But now, in that single moment, the truth broke over him like dawn. His kindness had not been forgotten. Sarah reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her voice was soft, trembling with emotion. We came back for you. You are the reason we are alive. You are the reason we can stand here today. Daniel tried to speak but could not. His chest ached with emotion, his vision blurred with tears. He had given up so much for them, never asking for anything in return, and now they had returned, carrying with them honor and power he could not even imagine. The crowd bowed their heads, ashamed, awed, and humbled. The man they had ignored, mocked, and dismissed was being honored before their eyes. For Daniel, it felt like a dream. Yet the warmth of Sarah's hand, the strength in Lyra's voice, and the glow of the ship told him it was real. The orphans were no longer orphans, they were leaders, and they had come not to forget him, but to lift him into the stars with them. The reunion was complete. The night air trembled with silence as Daniel stood surrounded by his neighbors, staring at the two women who had once been starving children at his door. Lyra and Sarah rose to their feet, their expressions filled with warmth and purpose. Behind them, the great starship glowed like a sun against the dark sky. Daniel wiped at his eyes, still struggling to believe what stood before him. Why? Why would you return here? Why come for me? His voice was weak, filled with disbelief. Lyra stepped closer, her long cloak brushing against the snow. Because you gave us the greatest gift of all, the chance to live. When we had nothing, you gave us food. When we were alone, you gave us shelter. When we had no hope, you gave us safety. She paused, her eyes steady. We swore we would return. Tonight we keep that promise. Sarah turned and raised her hand. With a soft hum, the ship's platform extended once more. Its golden light fell across the colony, illuminating the faces of every witness. Come with us, Daniel. Step onto the ship. It is time you see what your kindness has created. The crowd murmured in awe as Daniel, hesitant and trembling, took his first steps toward the shining vessel. His boots crunched against the snow, each step heavier than the last. His heart pounded. He was just a miner, a forgotten man. What place did he have in such a ship? When he reached the platform, Sarah supported his arm gently, guiding him upward. The platform lifted, and the world below grew smaller, until the colony looked like nothing more than scattered lights against white ground. Daniel's neighbors stared up, their faces pale, realizing that the man they had once mocked was being taken into the heavens. The platform slid into the starship, and for the first time, Daniel saw its interior. He froze in wonder. The halls glowed with silver and crystal, walls carved with flowing patterns that shimmered like starlight. Servants in fine garments bowed as Lyra and Sarah passed, their eyes full of respect. Daniel blinked in disbelief. This was not just a ship, it was a palace among the stars. Sarah guided him into a chamber at the heart of the ship. Inside, a long table glittered with food unlike anything he had ever seen. Golden fruits, meats cooked to perfection, bread soft and steaming. The air smelled rich and warm, so different from the thin, cold air of the colony. Daniel's throat tightened. I don't belong here, he whispered. But Lyra touched his shoulder. You belong here more than anyone. This is all because of you. Our people live again, our name restored, because you chose to care when no one else would. Sarah gestured to the far wall. With a command, the panels slid open, revealing something greater than food or riches. Outside the wide viewing glass, stars stretched across the darkness, and among them dozens of ships appeared, an entire fleet waiting, shining, carrying the banners of their restored house. Daniel staggered back, speechless. This is your gift, Lyra said softly. Not the fleet, not the treasures, not the power, but the knowledge that one small act of kindness lit the spark that saved an entire people. Sarah's voice trembled with emotion. And now, we will give you what you once gave us. Safety, family, a home that will never abandon you. Daniel closed his eyes. For 10 years he had lived in silence, thinking himself forgotten. But now he knew the truth. His kindness had echoed through the stars, returning to him in ways he could never have imagined. The forgotten miner had been given the greatest gift of all, a legacy. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the windows of the luxury starship, each one glowing like a silent witness to the moment. Daniel sat quietly in the grand chamber, his calloused hands resting on the polished table, his eyes wide as he tried to take in everything around him. The sisters sat beside him, Lyra calm and regal, Sarah bright with energy. For Daniel, it all felt unreal. Hours earlier, he had been nothing more than an old miner in a forgotten colony. Now he was aboard a ship of wonders, honored by two women who once clung to life in his tiny home. "Why me?" Daniel whispered at last. "I am no hero. I am no leader. I never asked for any of this." Lyra's voice was soft but firm. "That is why you deserve it. True kindness asks for nothing. You gave because it was right, not because you expected a reward." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes shining. "Do you know what they call you among our people? The guardian of the orphans? A name passed in whispers, a story told to keep hope alive. You are not forgotten, Daniel. You are legend." The words struck him harder than any hammer in the mines. Legend. He shook his head. He remembered only a simple act. One coat, one pot of stew, one night of shelter. To him, it was nothing extraordinary. But to them, it had been everything. The sisters led him through the ship, showing him halls filled with art, gardens blooming with flowers from worlds he had never heard of, and chambers where voices sang in languages unknown. At every corner, people bowed to him, not because of his wealth or power, but because of the story carried by their rulers, the story of a man who gave when he had nothing. Daniel's heart swelled with emotions he could not name. For years he had thought of himself as forgotten, a shadow in a cold colony. Yet now he saw how far one act had traveled. His kindness had not ended with that meal. It had grown, rippling outward until it touched lives he would never know. Days later, when the Starship hovered once more over the colony, the people gathered in silence. They watched as Daniel stepped out, no longer the bent miner they had ignored, but a man transformed. The sisters walked beside him, their presence radiating strength, and the crowd bowed their heads. Shame burned in their eyes, but awe quickly replaced it. For the first time, they understood. They had lived beside a man whose small kindness had changed the galaxy. Daniel did not scold them, nor did he boast. He only spoke one simple truth. Never believe your kindness is wasted. Even the smallest act can outlive you. The words spread like fire. Traders carried them to other colonies. Refugees whispered them in camps. And soon, across distant stars, people spoke of the human miner who once fed two orphans. His name was not always remembered, but his deed was. In time, Daniel left the colony for good. He traveled with Lyra and Sarah, living among their people, welcomed as family, honored as the man who gave hope to a dying bloodline. His days of loneliness ended, and though he still preferred quiet corners and simple meals, the galaxy now knew him as something greater. Legends are often born of battles, crowns, or power, but Daniel's legacy was different. His came from warmth, from compassion, from a single night when he chose to share what little he had. And so, as the luxury starship carried him into the stars, the story of the human miner lived on, a story that proved that in the vast, cold universe, kindness was the strongest power of all.